Hey guys, Mathel here once again. Bright light seizure warning as pretty much per usual. We got ourselves a pretty interesting interaction slash build slash skill, etc. That's already been played to completion. It's taken 19 hours to take this build from concept into a whole bunch of Ubers and level 94, and it's been pretty fucking fast. It is Absolution, which is the new version that basically is what Stormcall wishes it could be. It scales very well with damage, it scales very well with area, and ultimately just is, I think, a better version of Stormcall in the end, because it functions very similarly, it looks very similar, and then it doesn't have a delay attached to it. But what it does is the transfigured version of Absolution scales with minion damage a lot better, and then you basically build into your own self-hit or self-cast damage, and the minion portion of it is pretty worthless because it takes away one of your minions. So from 3 down to 2, and then if you're just scaling your own self-hit, your minions really aren't doing any damage. So it's kind of what looks like a minion build to begin with, but then the minions do nothing in this build, and it becomes just your own self-cast Stormcall style build. So we scale lots of minion damage, and I do that through Abyssal Jewels, and Abyss Jewels that have minion damage is increased if you've used a minion skill recently, but I'm also doing something else that's a little bit different, which is minions, or you get 10% attack cast speed for minions that have died recently. It's a pretty new thing for me. I haven't seen it before. So if a minion has died recently, then I get 10% cast speed from a single jewel slot, and if I stack a lot of those, I'm getting something like 80% cast speed every time one of my minions dies. And to ensure that happens, I'm using a level 1 Herald of Purity, and then they just die all the freaking time. So you summon a Herald of Purity whenever you attack things or kill things, and then they're just constantly dying, and I'm constantly getting 80% cast speed from that. On top of that, using the Abyssal Jewels everywhere with the extra minion damage is giving me a lot every time I use Absolution. And then I'm also using Lightpoacher, which gives you 5% of Fizz as extra Ellie damage of every element per spirit charge for every Abyssal Jewel you are using. So as you can see, I have 11 spirit charges. I'm using 11 Abyssal Jewels, which is 55% Fizz as extra of all elements, which is a huge amount of scaling. But typically, your Lightpoacher will try to consume those spirit charges when you cast. So to solve that, you have to either be CI or low life with not enough life to spend when you put life tap on the spirit charge, and then it has an associated cost with life tap plus Archmage. It has an associated cost that will then be higher than what you can spend. So if you're CI or if you're low life with absolutely no life remaining, you will never spend your spirit charges, and as such you'll permanently gain a huge amount of extra damage. The result is an extremely powerful setup. I'm also using Fanaticism, so with the jankiness of the entire build, when it all comes together, I am dealing 100+ million DPS, and it is noticeable. When it all comes together, we are cleaning up Ubers, we are cleaning up Guardians and four-ways and all kinds of trash, and it is very powerful. It is jank as fuck, and I don't recommend anyone else do it, because managing spirit charges when they could drop off, when you have to refresh them with your writhing jar, because that's what I'm doing for boss fights, when you have to start up a boss fight with writhing jar like this, when my minions could kill my writhing jar before I get around to it, that could be jank, having to line up the Fanaticism with everything else. I will say though, Fanaticism, which is just the Inquisitor thing where you attack a few times and then get 4 stacks of something, then you turn into Fanaticism. That thing, this time around it has not felt too bad. Like, I have actually noticed it's pretty powerful. It's up maybe half the time if you're shield charging around a lot, and it's felt pretty damn powerful. Like, it's been fairly worth it. It's hard to take over a lot of regen and that consecrated ground pathway for an Inquisitor, but it is still Definitely an option, I think, and maybe a bit underrated at the moment. It's a bit annoying having to line it up sometimes, but once you do, and once you get used to doing it for your burst window and stuff, you can see that the results do kind of speak for themselves. We do have huge amounts of uber boss damage, and it's pretty damn thick. The other thing is that Absolution is very good with Awakened Spell Cascade. As you can see, we cast out 5 little Absolution things, and if there's good overlaps, then you do much more damage. To get 5 overlaps right in the middle is pretty damn tough, and you do need a lot of area. I rarely get that except for on large boss hitboxes like this over here. Otherwise, you have to line it up for 3. Most likely 3, kind of just a bit under or above the boss, and then you have 3 good overlaps from at least 3 of the 5 of your Absolutions. So there is a lot of jank to the build, but there is also a lot of potency, and it is kind of one of the wackiest to put together sort of builds and situations I've done probably ever. And I also do want to go ahead and show you how I've put the character together, but also how I came to the build, just so you can understand kind of the build thought process. So here is the character. It's level 94, absolute worst door, Absolution, Inquisitor, door, and I did not know where this build was going to go. It may have been the worst build I made this league, so we made that kind of name. But turns out the scaling's actually pretty damn good for the new Absolution, which right here, as you can see, currently level 21, Absolution of Inspiring turns into level 30. Increases and reductions to minion damage also apply to the skill's damage at 50% of their value, but it has a baseline of 200%, so then with the extra quality it's 250%, so every 100% minion damage you gain gives you, an extra 150, which becomes pretty crazy. So the idea was to kind of go more quality stacking. So to give you a bit of an insight, a lot of people ask how I make a build or how a build idea comes together. Is it a unique? Is it an item? Is it an ascendancy? Whatever the fuck. It's not a whole guide here, but just a quick snapshot of how it came together for this one. I kind of wanted to look at Crest of Desire. I'm like, what can I do with Crest of Desire? Things that scale well with that. Spells, typically, something to do with quality stacking. I started looking around. I thought this Absolution, I wanted to play with that one. It's a new Absolution. It scales well with quality, scales well with the levels. I'm looking at that. I'm thinking, yep, maybe I could do something with that. But then ended up deciding that maybe that's not good enough, might need a bit more cast speed, might need a bit more links. That's probably not going to work. So then in the end, I started just staring at Absolution of Inspiring and threw this thing away because I still wanted to play with this thing a lot. Started thinking of how I could do that. I wanted to use Fanaticism for the first time in a while. At the same time, I wanted to maybe go with some quality stacking for Ashes of the Stars. Someone said something about Lightpoacher. I'm like, okay, yep, maybe I could do a bunch of Abyssal stacking. That'd be pretty cool. We could then stack a lot of increased damage if you've used a minion skill recently, Jules. So I started to think of how I could do a Lightpoacher setup and then make the Lightpoacher setup permanent. It turned into, this probably has to be low life because I don't want to do CI. I don't think I'd get enough energy shield out of it or enough value out of it. I went, yep, try and do low life. It's going to have to be an Inquisitor so I can get Fanaticism. It's going to have to be a whole bunch of stuff with Ivory Tower because I picked this Ivory Tower up for 10 Divines. Seemed logical enough that we could then stack life, stack energy shield, do kind of like an Energy Blade setup, but without the Energy Blade. Once I started building the thing, it turned into Ghost Wrath is going to be better. So this thing was 5 Divines, and then stacked life, stacked energy shield, but instead it's Ghost Wrath instead of Ivory Tower. Once I started shopping for some of these jewels, just increased damage if minion skill used recently. I saw one that had minion cast or cast speed if a minion has died recently. Then I thought, holy fuck, I've never seen that mod before. I have to actually make use of that somehow, because if I chuck this in my Darkness Enthroned, if I chuck these all over the place, I get like 80 cast speed. But how can I make sure a minion's going to die recently? Okay, then we have Herald of Purities. They're up all the time. They're dying quite frequently. What if we make them die faster? What if I attach an Infernal Legion to them? Can't do that because that's extra sockets on the build that I can't afford to put away. So then what if I just did a level 1 and then they're dying all the time? It makes it a bit jank. It doesn't mean that they're always dying, but most of the time when it matters, during almost any tough encounters, they're all they're getting summoned all the time, they're dying all the time. I'm getting a permanent 80% increase in cast speed. So then we have to make sure that Lightpoacher's working, it's Writhing Jar, it's reserving the right things, it's a lot of staring at the passive tree. I wanted to do Ashes of Stars with it, but in the end, a couple of extra levels is better than the quality that would have otherwise come from the gem for minion damage. And then the whole build just kind of came together like that. I used charms to get extra flasks because I had to make sure I was wearing coruscating elixir for the low life aspect of the build. You could either be CI or low life. If you're low life, typically you are either shavs or a coruscating elixir setup with an ivory tower. In this case, it's a ghost wraith, but still a coruscating elixir setup. So to make sure it's permanently lasting, you usually do a trader keystone from like the brutal restraint, but because I wanted to do a bunch of minion damage stacking, I went with elegant hubris and did 80 minion damage there, 40 multi, 30 chaos, 80 minion, and 80 minion over here. So I can't do a trader keystone, so instead I had to just go all out with jewel and charm sockets, giving me flask charges. So flask charge there, flask charge there, flask charge there, and then also the that which was taken, which has flasks gain. So I've got 4 flasks going up every 3 seconds, and it mostly sustains all of this flasks, especially the coruscating, which is super important. Doesn't fully sustain, but it's good enough for my purposes. So that's kind of the build. That's how it all came together, and that's what ended up happening. Absolution hits like an absolute truck in this thing. I don't know, on the high end, probably hits for something like 10 million, and then the overlaps are damn near 100 million. You do have fanaticism, so every time you shield charge, you have an extra fanatic charge, and then you have to kind of balance it to give you fanaticism right when you need it, and it gets a bit awkward that way, especially with the spirit charges. And in the end, you could make a much bigger version of this build if you did Adorned and then stacked blue jewels with this extra damage mod, and also if you did Ralakesh boots. You probably wouldn't have to go Lightpoacher, you probably wouldn't have to go full like meme abyssal stacking, but it kind of makes sense. And instead of doing all this charm stacking, you'd just do a trader keystone, you'd do some low life, and you wouldn't do this jank as fuck minion damage stuff here, because we get like 240 here, but if you did Adorned and did abyssal jewels across the whole tree, you could probably get 2 to 3 times more damage than I currently have, would be my guess. And then Ralakesh boots could also factor in if you want to go to the next level. All we're trying to say here is that Absolution with the minion damage scaling is pretty damn cracked. So in my sockets here we have Spell Echo Awakened, we do have crit and crit damage, just crit damage, I don't need the crit anymore. Cascade, which I wouldn't really recommend playing the skill without. With just regular Cascade, it feels, it goes in a straight line, it doesn't feel too great. The extra coverage is super nice. Inspiration, and then Energy Leech. I was using Crit Gem for most of the time, and I map with this regular flask that just gives me bleed immunity. Otherwise, the Writhing Jar is purely for boss fighting and stuff like that. Other than that, yeah, just trying to fix resists and stats, and needed to do an unset so I could fit an extra aura in. This is Clarity over here. Running a self-made shield that's got plus fizz with some minion damage and double damage focus on both my things. Had to craft most of my, well, whatever I do have here, I had to craft myself for my own purposes. Since I am a battle mage build, I do have flat lightning that gets turned into spell damage. So we are using this, and this. So this spell damage, this lightning gets turned into lightning damage. I then just used essences until I got +1 minion, locked prefixes, did an unveil, and then got double damage focus. So we've got plenty of double damage there, and then also sometimes on the spell echo. The Lightpoacher itself needs Life Tap and needs Archmage to give it a cost, because I'm reserving most of my mana as well. The Spirit Burst itself is 11 life, but that is higher than the amount that I have to spend, and thus it will never spend the Spirit Charges. So that's the technology used for Lightpoacher becoming kind of a cheese item. It does end up being a bit weird for bosses if you, don't maintain your Writhing Jar and stuff. So we just pop our Writhing Jar, we kill some of these. We got 4 Spirit Charges. Currently they've got 15 seconds or so to go down. and we have to make sure that we get more Writhing Jar action before that happens. You can see if I pop some, my minions might kill my Writhing Jars, and that might cuck me a bit. So we've got to kill them before the minions, or we've got to kill them when they're not around. And then we just maintain spirit charges that way. But it's very powerful in the end to give us a lot of extra damage. It's something that can be used for most physical spells that can give you a shitload of extra damage. And I do recommend that. But what you need is a life tap and an Archmage for that to work. And then we're also using Command of the Pit, Bubonic Trails for a bunch of extra stuff. So I had to use this trash unique hypnotic just for the sake of reservation here. And then for the belt, like I said, cast speed, minion killed recently, and then minion damage if I've used a skill recently. And there's just flat life and ES wherever I can get it. And to also solve mana, I needed to run a Watcher's Eye with minus mana cost on Clarity. And that's kind of, I think, where it's at. Just another cluster over here that gives me more minion jewels. And that's pretty much all I think I need to say. So that is the build. Absolution with minion scaling with a bunch of weird tech that ends up coming together to become a pretty damn cracked build. It was fairly jank and weird to play and to put together. I wouldn't really recommend trying to copy this exact thing. You can. It's not impossible to do, but you're probably better off doing it in a Adorned setup with magic jewels or some other way to not cause yourself huge levels of discomfort when playing the build against bosses. Hopefully that was something. Thank you very much for watching. See you guys next time.